From the far reaches of the Milky Way galaxy, it's Retro Nerd Girl with a film review for you. Today, I'll be reviewing the movie Ratatouille, released in 2007. Starring Brad Garrett, Lou Romano, and Patton Oswalt. Directed by Brad Bird and Jan Pinkava. The synopsis is, Remy is a rat from the countryside who dreams of being a Parisian chef. He finds himself alone in the big city of Paris, and with the help of a human, Alfredo Linguini as his guise, he cooks for humans at a world-famous restaurant. The story. Pixar's eighth feature-length film was a concept hatched by Jan Pinkava in 2001, who created the original design, sets, characters, and basics of the story, along with the help of Jim Capobianco. As good as the idea was, Pixar's management didn't feel confident with the total concept and didn't think the story had as much depth as it needed for one of their productions. The head of Pixar, John Lasseter, asked Brad Bird, who had just finished The Incredibles, released in 2004, to help out and eventually was given the role of director. Ultimately, Jan Pinkava's involvement in the film ended after a few years, and he left the company. Brad Bird, producer Brad Lewis, and some of the other crew members went to Paris, for a week to research the story ideas and to pull upon the real experience of being in Paris. They took a motorcycle tour around the capital and ate at its 5 top restaurants, from which they all got a lot of influence and reference for the film. With Pinkava's great ideas, Brad Bird tweaked it and rewrote the screenplay. The biggest change in the story was to bring the story in the heart of Paris, above ground with the humans, instead of keeping the story underground in the catacombs and sewers of the city as it was originally planned. The name of the film, Ratatouille, originates from the double meaning, since the main protagonist is a rat, and the second is that ratatouille is a traditional French meal prepared with vegetables. The story starts out pretty simple, but then it blossoms into a touching story. It's actually a very mature story with very little slapstick humor or antics. It has a very serious tone, and a lot of the comedy that comes from it is actually quite appropriate. It's not overdone, and I actually liked this kind of more grown-up kids movie. It's really interesting. As well, as with many Pixar and Disney movies, we get a lot of references to their other movies packed into the story. Lots of hidden Mickeys everywhere, and you can see The Incredibles in some of the backgrounds, and there's always a reference to room A113 from the California Institute of the Arts, where many of the animators from Pixar began their career. Pacing. The pacing. At 1 hour and 51 minutes, it's pretty good. I think most movies have the same kind of starts out really good, and then it has a dip in the middle where it gets to be kind of boring. Not quite boring, but kind of frustrating, and then it works itself out by the end. So we have the typical storyline dip in the middle, and then again at the end you have a really nice finish to the movie. And with Pixar, there's always a lot of heart, so they managed to pack that in too. So the pacing was pretty good. Now the challenge. Well, the challenge in this film, first of all, is that our protagonist, Remy, is a rat. There's no way getting around it. And I think it wouldn't be so bad for him if, within the rat society, there was a request for his services as a chef. But it seems as if in the society of rats, they really don't care about where the food comes from, what it tastes like. They just want to eat. They want to eat everything. So it's very difficult for poor Remy, who has very discerning tastes. And in the human world, he sees all this opportunity because he knows that humans will be able to appreciate his food. A secondary challenge is Remy's father, Django, who scoffs at his dreams for being a chef among humans because, he's actually just really afraid for his son. He doesn't want his son to actually end up dead or hurt. So there's a lot of concern there for his son. He even tries to shock Remy into quitting this kind of persistent desire to work with humans because he takes him to this shop window displaying a whole bunch of dead rats, which coincidentally is actually a real life store that can be found in Paris. Unfortunately, Remy's desire to be a chef for humans is way too strong to be afraid of something as simple as death. Now, the biggest villain in the film, I would say, the primary villain is definitely the fact that Remy is a rat. But one of the biggest villains in this film, in the human world, as a human, is Skinner, the temporary head chef at Gusteau's, who seeks to take over permanently. And of all things, take the good name of Gusteau to make money on frozen dinners. There's a lot of very, very unethical practices with this Skinner guy. So he is definitely a person who really needs to get some therapy. Now, speaking of therapy, Chef Skinner was actually named after psychologist B.F. Skinner, who theorized that learning is the result of reward and punishment based on his experiments on, of all things, rats. Very, very interesting. Now, in the movie, Skinner is very, very over the top and a very, very ambitious character, doing everything that he can to keep everyone and anyone from finding out that Gusteau has an heir. Alfredo Linguini, the guy who takes out the trash for the restaurant. He's doing everything that he can so he is the one who can take over the restaurant business and pretty much poach the name of Gusteau. There is Anton Ego, the food critic, and he is the most impressionable villain in the story. Actually, in theory, killing Gusteau, possibly by unfairly giving the restaurant a bad review. He is an elegant man on appearances, but ghastly intimidating with a vile sense of cruelty as he relishes his role as an important influence to the community. Ego's room for writing is shaped like a coffin, and the back of his typewriter resembles a skull, playing on the fact that he possibly may have caused the death with his writing. And even funnier, it's said in the movie that he writes killer reviews, quote unquote killer reviews. Hilarious, but also kind of sad that he relishes in the fact that he can destroy people with his word. Now, while tasting Remy's ratatouille, Ego finds himself in a perplexing cacophony of emotions that he's never experienced. That he hasn't experienced since childhood. And it's in what I can only describe as the feeling of comfort and family and of being loved. So somehow along the way he forgot those feelings. And his character was also a gentle commentary on the role of critics and how easily it is for them to viciously review inferior materials monstrously. But in spite of that, they're people with compassion as well. Just, waiting for that moment to be deeply touched by the work of an artisan. And what I like about the character is how we're able to find him so very relatable. And his character arc is quite inspiring. It's almost like the Scrooge story, the redemption. Just puts a smile on my face every time I think about that character and how he makes that 180 or 360, whichever one. Well, 360 would be right where you started from, right? So it would be 180. I had to work that out. The empathy. Now, okay, look, right away, I liked Remy the rat, okay? Because although life is hard for him, his subconscious mind will not allow him to settle for anything unsatisfying in life where he cannot experiment with his love, with food. He just must pursue this desire, this incredible dream of his. And, with his family of rats, he's kind of treated as a weirdo for not being able to kind of blend in and stifle his true feelings and his true talents. In the story, Remy ends up in Paris at Gusteau's restaurant of all places. He's happens to be a big fan of Gusteau. And interestingly enough, the ghost of Gusteau actually leads him to his restaurant and kind of gives him a little bit of a push, a little mentoring along the way, which is pretty cool. You could or couldn't agree that maybe the ghost is his imagination taking charge and kind of pushing Remy to the next stage in his life, or it could actually be Gusteau's ghost kind of coming back to right the wrongs and fix what was kind of broken in the restaurant. When Remy gets to Paris, he meets a human, the garbage boy Alfredo, who just so happens to be Gusteau's illegitimate son. And he's also the heir to the restaurant, but no one knows this. So we get this really cool relationship with Linguini and Remy, where there's some trust issues that they have to work out along the way. Remy actually discovers a way to control Alfredo's movements by pulling his hairs in a strategic way, and becomes a chef through Alfredo. Now, Alfredo is his full name is Alfredo Linguini, which is actually a play on the dish linguine with Alfredo sauce, which I'm sure you guys figured it out. Just in case anyone is confused, he was named after a dish because the movie is about food. Now, it becomes very apparent that this charade that Remy is doing won't hold up forever. And after reuniting with his family, he realizes he really doesn't fit anywhere. He doesn't fit with the humans, and he doesn't fit with the rats. And, that kind of self-discovery is kind of shocking and lonely, to find out that you don't fit anywhere. And I'm sure a lot of people can identify with that. There's also a love story in play with Linguini and his co-worker Colette, which is one of the more interesting characters in the film, but she only serves to really back up Linguini. She's a nice character, and I love the scenes that she's in, but she's not given enough to do in the film. The technical aspects. Initially, the rats were to be more like rats shown in the 2D end credit sequence, more cute and unrealistic. However, the design of the rats were made after a rat expert brought a group of real rats for the art animation departments to observe. And they did that for more than a year so that the animators could really study their movements and their structure, their hair and every aspect of these creatures, just to find out like how to animate them properly with as much realism as possible without, grossing everyone out. And you can see that realism within the animation while keeping a very human-like quality to their faces and body movements. Well, not quite the body movement, but the acting that was done to convey moments in the film. For a more authentic movement and realism, Brad Bird had mainly female animators working on Colette's animation. Very interesting choice there. The animation team studied Chef Thomas Keller at his restaurant, French Laundry, in order to get a better understanding of the art of cooking. And at the same time, we got a voice cameo from Mr. Keller as a patron in Gusteau's. The famous dish Ratatouille that Remy prepares is actually a variation called Confit Bialdi, adapted by Thomas Keller. The difference between the two is that the vegetables are more thinly sliced and baked instead of the traditional vegetables cut into chunks and put into a pot. The visual scenes and establishing shots were pretty amazing, capturing Paris in a way that's magical and inviting, especially to those who have never been there before. One of the most incredible features in the film is the theme song, written and produced by Michael Giacchino and performed by Camille. It's a very beautiful song capturing a very Parisian flair. Performances. The star of the film, Remy, was played by Patton Oswalt, putting a wonderfully sensitive and extremely likable tone to the character. He got the role after Brad Bird saw his stand-up routine about the menu at Black Angus Steakhouse, which you could probably hear on the internet. Although his character in the film is different from his stand-up, you can hear the inflections in his voice as he describes the food and how passionate he is about it. Sir E.M. Holm plays Skinner, and I almost didn't recognize his voice, to be honest, because his performance was so transformative. Brad Garrett voiced Gusteau, and Lou Romano distinctively voiced Alfredo Linguini. Peter O'Toole excellently voiced the food critic Anton Ego, lending a bold, rich statement with his character, both emanating the complexity of intimidation and the sensitivity when needed. Janeane Garofalo was especially wonderful voicing Colette, lending a raw realism to the character while also being completely transformative as well. Because in the beginning of the movie, she's very no nonsense, and towards the end she's more loving and caring. The best part of the film. Now, the best part of the film for me would be the way the film makes you really care about Remy, who is essentially a very realistic rodent. Myself personally, I'm very, 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 very afraid of rats. Very, very afraid of them. And they really freak me out. They do. So to find myself at the end of the film feeling so very, very much endeared to this character, endeared to all of the rodent characters, it was very surprising to me. the other best part was Anton Ego, who starts off as the pessimistic and the mean-spirited food critic, who turns out to be an enchanting and wonderful storyteller, as well as a person who has a lot of heart and caring. Now, it was also a wonderful mixture of voice acting, animated acting, which is, done through the animation team itself, creating the emotional depth for each of the characters, which Pixar does very well. And, actually, I wouldn't even say very well, I would say excellently. And the dialogue, too, cohesively married with all of these elements to enrich the story so beautifully. Now, the ending. The ending to me felt a little rushed. It was almost like a circus, how everything had to kind of like, oh, we've got to hurry up and do this, and just rushing around. And we have this incredible scene of like hundreds of rats in a restaurant cooking the food for patrons. It's hilarious, but at the same time, to think of it, the actual thought of it is just gross, and somehow we're able to let that go for the story. One of the greatest parts of the ending, of course, is, I can't even say it anymore, but Anton Ego's character transformation and how he ends up really being a great help to Remy. It's a sweet, happy ending after all that poor little Remy has been through. He deserves a happy ending, Now the wish list. My wish list, I wish that the film made Alfredo Linguini a bit smarter, a bit more like a real human. I mean, he's a character in this film. I'll give you a great example. Remy's been using his body to make the chef special for a week at the restaurant, but when people ask him what's in the dish, what are the ingredients, he doesn't even know. He doesn't even have an arc, too. He's pretty much the same guy from the beginning to the end of the film. Also, it seems to be like we went through the story beat for beat for beat, and then boom, we get to the next scene. We don't get that beat in between where Linguini finds out, oh, Remy has the piece of paper that says that Alfredo is Gusteau's heir. And this would have been great for Alfredo's character to have a moment of, again, we're going back to Alfredo's character, which is the weakest link in this movie. Give him a moment to really describe what's going on inside of him. So that's, maybe they just didn't have time to. We have to consider all of these things, and then maybe they didn't have time to add that scene in there because it would have been a longer movie. Now, to the enjoyment. At the time, Disney had bought Pixar for $7.4 billion in 2006 during the production. I mean, this is what the film really needed to get its much needed exposure. With Disney behind them, it would have given it a big bump. But unfortunately with Ratatouille, there was a few snags. One of them was that no food product company wanted to be associated with rats. And yeah, even a cartoon rat, just not cool. And so we can all understand that and understand why. They were closed off for a lot of partnerships on that. And Disney Pixar were planning to bring a French-produced Ratatouille branded wine to Costco stores. But the California Wine Institute wisely felt that cartoon characters on wine bottles would encourage underage drinking. And then the name of the movie, though clever, was a French word that the general public wasn't familiar with. So Disney Pixar had it spelled phonetically on all of the promotional materials so people would know how to pronounce it. No matter the challenges out of the gate, you can't keep a good movie down. The film debuted at #1, making it the third highest grossing Pixar film at the time. In France, the film broke the record for the biggest debut for an animated film. Ratatouille was nominated for 5 Oscars, including Best Original Score, Best Sound Editing, Best Sound Mixing, Best Original Play, and Best Animated Film. And Disney created a theme park attraction in Disneyland Paris, based upon the scenes from the film where the visitors were shrunk down to the size of a rat. You know, initially I didn't really think much of actually seeing the film. Wasn't really drawn to it at all because, you know, I have to be totally honest. I'm actually super duper afraid of rats. Okay, they make me, they just scare me, and they are the way they move and the way they're like sliding all over the place. But there's you know, there's one scene in the movie. It's in the beginning of the film when the ceiling falls at the elderly woman's house, revealing, oh my God, a huge horde of rats. And I think I nearly lost it in that scene. It's, you know, totally gross. But the film was suggested by so many people I knew who have said that it's their favorite movie. And so I gave it a chance. And when it became available to me, I braved watching it. And it was a wonderful surprise to see how the film was able to make me so sympathetic to Remy right out the gate. And it was all done very tastefully, no pun intended. and it just brought so many touching emotions to many of the characters. And also in the way that they were animated to move. The voice acting and the written work, the dialogue that was written. I just loved all of it, and it was such a wonderful surprise. My rating is an 8.6. Well, that sums up my review. I hope you liked it. This is Retro Nerd Girl signing off. Take care, movie lovers. I'm off to my next review.